Assalamu alaikum. What a pleasure to see and be in the company of all of you. My journey with FranklinCovey and my journey with most of you over here spans just about 2 decades. And when I was thinking about the journey of leadership, I was thinking about FranklinCovey and all of you and my journey as well. And I was looking at all these faces. And I kind of thought about all those highs and lows like every journey has. I thought about all those celebrations and commiserations which each of us have in our own journeys. But I felt extremely blessed because throughout these ups and downs of more than 2 decades, you have nurtured me, guided me, supported me, inspired me, stood by me, and most of all, believed in me. I thank you. So when we talk about a journey of leadership, and Curtis has been very lucid and very enlightening in his talk about change, I'm going to trace down a little bit of the history of leadership. And no history of leadership can ever be complete without taking the timeless wisdom of the Eastern perspective, which is rooted in the principles which never change. And I think that was my first attraction to FranklinCovey, because Stephen Covey talks about the timeless principles. Policies change, programs change, practices change, principles don't change. And when we look at the earliest part, all these sages from the East, what was their basic belief? Their basic belief was that man is the leading creation of God. God has created him above others. But when we look around, we see the opposite. So every era was marked by a leadership of the opposite. Wars, accumulation of resources, domination of lands, leadership by position, leadership by power, leadership by authority. All these were and still are quite common practices. So if we look back to the earliest times of who were the thought leaders, we see in the 4th and 5th century BC, voices raised against that type of leadership. And we hear the leader being the reservoir of virtue and moral authority rather than the positional authority. We look at Buddha and his constant voice against battles, where he says that it is better to conquer yourself than to fight 1,000 battles. Then the victory is yours. It cannot be taken away. Or we look at Confucius, and he says, lead the person with virtue, and the person will be virtuous. Lead the person with force, and the person will be forceful. So when we come into these times, and we look at the 11th century, and we see what happens, the influence of the Persian Empire starts happening. And the Persian Empire, as you know, was a center of learning, of literature, of science, of knowledge. And the Persian language had a tremendous influence on the East, especially countries like Iran, Turkey, produced some of the best thought leaders of their time. If you look at the 11th century, we have Umar Khayyam. And Umar Khayyam, his rubaiyat are till date great examples of what leadership should be. All of them talked about the inner transformation. All of them talked about rising above yourself and having a higher purpose. And I think that's what I found in FranklinCovey, that when you talk about the true status of man and this existential ask that all these thought leaders have had, that you're supposed to rise above. What are you doing? Why go so low? And that is the answer which is still man is seeking. But these leaders, Umar Khayyam, remember, Umar Khayyam was an amazing thought leader, philosopher, poet, astronomer, mathematician. And he talks about introspection and going in yourself to be able to bring a change, which he, in the end video you saw, which Curtis showed you, that if you can change nothing but yourself, that's enough. So he talks about going inside yourself and, the thoughtful soul to solitude retires. And his influence, Umar Khayyam, is so great even today. All the great English writers, D.H. Lawrence, Thomas Hardy, Edward Fitzgerald, they all acknowledge that they are inspired by him and his thought process. Then we come into the 13th century and we have Jalaluddin Rumi from Turkey, and we all know Rumi and his concept of destruction and resurrection, fana or baka, that the leader has to, हैवानियत की फना, इंसानियत की बका hai. That concept, that why are you seeking inspiration everywhere? It lies within you. He says, be silent and listen. And then Rumi's concept of love and going above yourself, and even if it is breaking you inside, it is a tremendous human opening. He says, keep on breaking your heart till it opens. And the wound is the place where the light enters. Then in between, in the 15th century, we see a very popular philosophy of leadership. Machiavelli comes in. He's an Italian philosopher. And Machiavelli's book Prince was an absolute bestseller. And his concepts are pragmatism over idealism, and results justify all types of means. And that had a tremendous influence, I think, in the type of corporate corridors, power corridors, practices at that time. Now let's come closer to home, and that is we are talking about Pakistan itself. And we're talking about the 17th century mystic philosopher, spiritual, Bulleh Shah. And he talks about the conflict we are having inside and those who win that conflict. And that conflict between rationality and irrationality, where he says ke akal aakhe tu bachve bulya, ishq aakhe tu nachve bulya. So that tantalizing conflict between physicality and spirituality is the hallmark where they go above themselves. And then finally, of course, the 19th century, and that's why I'm going to talk about that. These thought leaders have had tremendous impact. Sometimes a word, a verse, a phrase, they change your mind. And Stephen Covey's, I remember, and I noticed that everywhere, one of his saying about the inner transformation and inside-out leadership It is not what others do to us which hurts us. It is not what others do to us which hurts us. Fundamentally, it is our chosen response to what others do to us which hurts us. Has had a profound impact on many people. I've seen that happen. So we enter the 19th century and Pakistan is not there at the moment. And imagine the First World War, the Second World War, and Allama Iqbal is there. And he's talking about Khudi, the inner transformation, the leader who has Khudi. And again, the Persian influence is there. His first two publications, if I'm right, were in Farsi. The first one was Asrar-e-Khudi, Secrets of Self. The second one, I think, was Ramooz-e-Bekhudi, The Mysteries of Selfless. And where wars and violence and domination are happening, his voice, his words, and his teachings created a whole change. And that change and that style of leadership is what we need to know more about.